First, hi, I'm Woody. I work with Jeff here at Delphix. Want to explain sort of how we accelerate a cloud migration. This is sort of the key use case for cloud for us, but there's also a couple others we'll talk about at the end. So you deploy your first Delphix instance on-prem and synchronize with your production systems or whatever system you want to use as the source. We talked before that could be an app, could be a database, could be something else. Once you've got that, we compress that down. Then you can deploy your second one in the cloud, and this could be at Amazon, could be at Azure. You could also decide that your premise is Amazon, and you want to communicate with Amazon to Azure. We'll actually do a replication for Amazon Azure in just a minute. Once you've got that, then you have a continuous replication going on. What does that mean? I heard someone talk before about how do you ship the incrementals and still maintain consistent state. That's the idea that we have of this thing called TimeFlow, which is it's a series of consistent states in order, right? Sort of like TiVo, where you have sort of, you can stop the film and there it is. It's the same thing with a data set that you come from any premise to any cloud target. You can stop it at any state you want. And when we replicate not only the current state, but also the time flow of all states. So that if you are running a development shop, for example, you could replicate every build in the same sort of way that you would on premises.
So a question on when you say you're replicating to cloud, this is a Delphix virtual machine appliance thing, is what I'm deploying.
This, right.
Yep. So I'm deploying into cloud infrastructure. I can't replicate into something, for example, like Redshift. Can I use something like there's an increasing use of services as cloud. So we have database services being spun up by Azure. They support, for example, Postgres. I don't have a database in the way that I would traditionally. I'm now just using some database service. How does Delphix work in that kind of environment, or is that
can speak to
coming?
Some of those services?
Yep.
But when we manage it, we manage the blocks natively directly.
Yep. So I'd have to deploy. So I'm using infrastructure as a service as cloud. So for the purposes of the discussion, cloud means infrastructure as a service.
So so these are two nodes that are talking to each other, two Delphix nodes talking to each other. So if, for example, I had an Oracle e-business suite application on the left-hand side, which would be database, binaries, and the application stack, right? I could ingest all three of those pieces as objects into the Delphix node on that side. Then I could replicate the entire set up to here. So it's not just a single thing, also it's a composite thing. And those composites could grow very large. We have a financial institution that has a composite that's some 700 or 800 objects in their composite because they want to do end-to-end testing.
I think to answer his question specifically, though, anything we create on the cloud side is running on infrastructure as a service. So we would create Oracle instances there, for example. Those are on infrastructure as a service. The integration we have with like the RDS database service, for example, is that if you're running production on RDS, we can pull data in from it, and then we can create all your non-prod copies for you. But those, again, will be on the infrastructure as a service side of their platform.
Part of the reason I'm asking is because, as we've discussed, one of the reasons for doing this is in test and dev. So I want a copy of production data, which I can then test against and make sure it works. I'm doing cloud native development, though, using services, not infrastructure. I can't use this to do that, though. It doesn't sound like. I could use it, but that would mean that I can't use services. I can't do service composition for my applications. I have to write my applications like they're using infrastructure on physical site in the cloud.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I mean, the short answer is correct. Our customers and our focus, as you saw, we have a relatively small number of customers for as large of a company, as a startup as we are. Our focus, it really is, healthcare, financial services, who they're just getting started on those concepts, and they're just getting started. You'll hear from Sai here, from Detegra in a little bit. They're just doing things like getting dev and test in virtual machines in the cloud. They're starting to do some of that native application development, and we certainly want to be there for them when they're getting there. But our main focus is really helping them operate their current very large data sets in the cloud, which they're starting with a lift and shift mentality, and then recognizing, obviously, as time goes on and as you enable more developers, they're going to see, oh, Dynamo, that looks awesome. I want to use that. And so we need to make sure we support that as well.
Okay.
Longer term, our model will be, in cases where we can connect and virtualize the data ourselves, we'll definitely do that because there's a lot of benefits that come with it. In other cases, we'll connect parts of our platform in, and we already do in some cases, like our masking can work directly with RDS databases.
Okay.
And then on top of that, we'll take advantage of any of those cloud native APIs. So just last week, you might have seen that Dynamo announced point-in-time recovery capabilities. And so that's a kind of thing that closely mirrors a lot of what we're doing, and we're happy to work with that and bring, at a point in time, your Dynamo database along with your Oracle database together in a data pod, conceptually. So that kind of speaks to our future direction.
Okay.
But our focus is much more so, the Fortune 100 type of customers who are just at the beginnings of that journey.
Okay.
So I've been one of these Fortune 100 type of customers. One of the first questions I would ask is, how does this impact my overall operations when I'm looking at like disaster recovery? Because I have to do data management for DR as well. And one of the things that we've started to look at in these super large enterprises is doing SAP recovery to AWS, Azure, et cetera. So if I have to get the data out of using my replication layer services, whatever tool I'm using to replicate up to there, it doesn't sound like you guys are targeting production workloads with this. So DR doesn't seem like a use case. So it seems repetitive from a operations perspective to have a DR solution that points to Azure and then a copy data solution that points also to Azure.
I'll let Woody, since you've got the floor.
Well, so I would say first, the way that the platform works, you can certainly use features that we have to do a failover, but it's a different kind of failover than you might think. It's not like a rack would be, for example, or a data guard. However, because the replication has occurred, right, that means that there's a consistent view, for example, of an SAP up here all the time. So if you want to fail over, you could, A, spin up a virtual database immediately. It would be available. You could then use a virtual to physical feature to then create the actual physical in the background, and you could fail it over sometime later when you decide that you want to. That's not the same as a first class rack or data guard, right? But lots of people pay a lot of money for stuff that's pretty close to that, right? So if you think about sort of where that line gets divided, a lot of people will be perfectly happy with that answer.
So
Okay.
I would be someone to be perfectly happy. Just failing over SAP is hard. Just
I agree.
I lost my hair because of it. I think a couple of questions, just not to go down a whole rabbit hole of SAP, but from a support perspective, when that DR environment, is that completely supported from SAP because they're very particular about that storage layer. So if that storage layer is virtualized, am I going to, when I call SAP for support and bringing up that DR environment, that I have the replicated data there, or are they going to look at my storage platform and say that it's not supported or supported?
To them, it appears the same. I don't think there's any difference.
Yeah,
It depends on the platform, because if it's HANA, it really depends on the platform.
Yeah, we're in their partner network, and we've talked through with them, and they have different requirements for production versus pre-production
Right.
and standby. We're pretty sure we meet all the requirements there, but ultimately, these are big databases, and you would want to get it onto physical infrastructure as soon as possible if you were doing a recovery. Physical, when I say physical, I don't mean not our virtual database capability, but a dedicated either physical infrastructure or virtual machines or Amazon instances, for example.
So is the eventual goal to get this out of virtualized data and onto what would have been the primary data source back in the data center? So let's say my data center is Azure, and I'm replicating to AWS and to a Delphix in AWS. I have an event. Is the idea basically to hydrate that data in AWS to EBS directly, and then have my BW and everything else connect directly to that EBS that's hydrated?
I'm sorry, AWS fails and you want to go to Azure?
No, Azure. Either way, either way.
Okay, well, whoever the target is, the receiver who's going to be failed over to, they already have a full and consistent copy of that, as well as 50,000 copies behind it, right? So the moment that fails, you can switch role to this be active, and you can say, spin me up copies now. And within the RTO window, you'll have them up.
And so when you say get it back to physical hardware,
Yeah.
So when you spin them up, you're spinning up a virtual copy. So you're saying, I want to present this copy of this, let's say it's SAP. SAP, you had an event 10 minutes ago. Okay, data from 10 minutes ago is already sitting in Amazon. You say, I want to spin it up. You press the button. It spins up copies of that. Those are virtual copies, but they're live.
Right.
You can use them. In the meantime, whoever your administrators can also say, and virtual to physical over to this other environment right now and start copying over.
And the core of your question, we would recommend you not run long-term production workloads on the virtualized database because it does have some I/O impacts.
Because that's the question.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for a large enterprise who traditionally would say, I'm going to do one-to-one capacity on both sides.
Yeah.
When I fell over to DR, it might take me, my RTO might be 24 hours because SAP is super complicated. But the RPO is 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever the RPO is. So total time to get me back into a production state in my DR location is the goal, because I might end up running on there for months because filling it back over is super complicated.
Yeah, and what Woody's saying is we can get you within minutes to start, possibly at a lower performance, and then in parallel get the higher performance environment fully hydrated, and then you can fail over again. And so it's better than nothing. Yeah.
But isn't the other issue here that differentiation between the physical management of data and the logical flow of data?
Well,
I
but
almost feel like
again-
we're convoluting the two together.
But
a
again,
bit.
when you come here, right, the way that we package the time flow is a logically consistent view of the data. In other words, every time that you have a boundary in that time flow, if it's a full-size snapshot boundary, then it's one kind of boundary condition. If it's a point in time, but every snapshot and every point in time is consistent as soon as you say, produce it for me. You follow what I'm saying? So in other words, if you decide to say, SAP failed 10 minutes ago, but I want 9 minutes and 48 seconds, I want to produce that consistently, that pops into life. Consistent at that point in time as it was at that point in time. Does that make sense? So even though the blocks are being held down here, the consistency is being managed logically at that layer to make sure that when you ask for that consistent data set, whether that's inside one SAP, inside 10 SAP correlated instances, or an Oracle and MS SQL together, it's all consistent together to that time point.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. The point I was trying to make is how you would manage data, and whether it's the underlying where it sits, where it rests, or managing the consistency of the data in the source is different than how you would manage it with your solution. And because it's a downstream player of this, right? The downstream component.
Yeah,
of
ultimately
that
my
source
basis
data.
my basis team determines if what I gave them was this 950. I can tell them what the storage layer is 948. The application team is going to tell me whether or not that's 948. They are the source of truth, right?
Right.
This is your point.
Of course.
They're the source of truth. So reconciling of what I'm delivering as an SLA from a storage provider perspective versus what the application says is true consistency. This is a challenge and I'm hoping you guys will get to the interface of being able to do this, because at the end of the day, large enterprise teams have a very hard time selling this type of concept to these SAP teams, for example. I love that you guys are using SAP as an example. I can give them 1,000 tools to replicate data. They're going to do an RMAN backup to a set of lungs that I produced and they're going to go the long way until I can prove to them that this is faster, easier, and Oracle approved.
Well, I think we should maybe dig into the data pod concept some more once we get through this a little bit to talk about that, because I think that is the answer you're looking for. So let me finish this up, and I'll definitely get back to your question. So you can mask the data on premises, and Jeff will show that in a little while, ensuring that no sensitive data leaves the production network. In other words, you can make this your secure perimeter, and you can make sure that when you move to the other perimeter, that you're only moving desensitized data.
Is that happening automatically, or are you having to tell it which field you want to mask?
I'll show you.
He'll show you, and it's pretty highly automated.
Is the mask reversible? Or
Oh, just about that. Yeah.
You have to know that there's 3 different kinds of things going on. So masking is not reversible. That's the point. Encryption, if you have the key, you can unlock it. And there's something else called tokenization, where if you have a token, you can mask it, and only someone who has the token can unmask it. And you choose which one you want.
So do I need 2 different replication targets if I want to do mask and unmask data as well? So DR versus dev and prod, dev and QA.
No, you just choose which ones you want to replicate and why. And then you can control who has security access to them.
I'll tell you what. Let's table the data masking questions till I get up there. I'm gonna walk through them all. I think otherwise we'll lose the context here.
Okay. You can also use, as we said, the virtual to physical tool. So if you want to push it out to something else to show how it works physically, if you want to run a serious performance test on like for like, that's pretty simple. And you can employ as many environments as you needed in about 1/10 the space once you're in the cloud. Part of the insight here for cloud, right, is that what does it cost you to get there? So first, when you ship bits into the cloud with Delphix, you ship the original footprint once, but you don't reship that ever again. A lot of solutions will reship that. Secondly, when you are shipping bits, you're shipping just Delta bits, and they're being reconstituted at the target to look like full size for you, so that when you ask for the full size, it's available right away.
Can I just clarify the scope
Sure.
of, so you're doing you say this is cloud migration, but for me, you're covering the cloud migration for the test and dev and putting some economies and some improvements there. But you've just, as you click the slide, you've just flicked production from one to the other. You're not helping with the production migration.
No, you are. With production migration, you think about it's the same problem. A lot of people have this thing where they make it a huge event. But what you really want is you want to be able to move a little bit at a time. You want to be able to come over to an Amazon, for example, run a couple of tests, see what's going on, right? You can virtualize that for a while, figure that out, get a perfect way to make sure that it works in the Amazon context. Then you can start moving them over when you want to, because it's a hot link, which means that I don't have to take anything down. I don't have to worry about any dependencies on that side. Everything that's coming over is hot linked over to here, so I can get a full-size view of everything on that side over to this side. Once it's already over here, I can provision using the V2P feature. I can create the physical, and I can catch it all the way up so that my cutover event becomes sort of a non-event in the middle of the night.
So you're
And
creating the production copy from the Delphix copy.
That's right.
Correct.
Okay.
Think about it, it's, when you do the first push, that's a long push, right? Because it's going to be line wire speed. But when you do the delta push, it's going to catch up all the way to the point where it's right behind where your prod is. That's when you want to go to the cutover, right? And you do it in your RPO window, no problem. Unless you're Wall Street, and then you got to have special stuff, but we have special sauce for that too.
And just to really clarify, you kind of spoke to it for performance testing, but in that last step, the virtual to physical, you can have that continuously replicating through. So there's an actual physical high performance production database that's a few seconds behind the one that's on premise. But it's also been in this environment that you've been doing a lot of elastic testing in for the last 2 months.
So in that aspect, you're kind of reversing where you've come from, where you started out, I guess, is you're
Right.
ingesting production data. At that point, you're pushing data
Right,
from the
now you're
Delphix
hydrating
production.
out of virtual back to full-size physical because you want it on that full-size physical.
And then you cut over and you kind of switch that the other
Right.
way, basically.
Yeah, you can reverse the polarity, yes.
Reverse the polarity, that's right. So I want to show you just a little bit of the tool itself. So let me switch over here.
Can you stick that Delphix engine on S3 or any different storage tiers?
Only on EBS.
It needs to be on a high performance storage. We're consolidating a lot of I/O from all the copies we create, so you need You need to be able to maintain high performance.
I guess to expand that question, regardless whether it's in the cloud or on-prem, can you tier that data? So if you've got snapshots and you're keeping them for 2-3 weeks, whatever, obviously that's just living there as data. Can that be pushed to other tiers of storage, or like S3? For example?
Today it's one pool of storage for Delphix, so you don't tier it. That's also something we're looking at for the roadmap, though, right? It's like, oh, really, this is archive stuff. We want to keep it around, but we don't expect it to be interactive, often
That's
at
a
all.
good insight, though, right? That's
Yeah.
good and it's bad, right? It's one pool of storage, which means everybody's overhead goes to the same overhead pool. Everybody's IOPS overhead goes to the same IOPS pool, which means that all the little variations and all the 50 or 100 objects that are sitting on that server are all being fed from the same pool. They don't have to have their own overhead on each different device. You share those and you become very efficient because you share them. And same thing happens in your memory space, right? We had a customer that was able to go from 5 environments, which was shared by 200 developers, to 200 environments not shared by anybody, because they're able to push more of the memory up to the engine, because the engine's acting, if you know anything about Oracle, acting like a resource list, a least recently used list. It's feeding out of memory back to them fast enough that even though it's going to disk on that particular instance, that request comes to Delphix and it goes to Delphix memory and comes served out of memory. So you can get a lot of economies of scale that way as well in your environment and really amp up how your hardware works for you. This is my local lab. Let me just log in here. And I have it connected to another local lab. And I just wanted to show you a little bit. This is our dashboard, but show you just a little bit about what it looks like. This is our standard interface. And over here, you'll see some of these objects. Now I have here a 2-tier object and an application with a database tier underneath that's in a container that I can ship that whole container from one Delphix node to another as a simulation for an SAP or an EBS or something of that nature. I have on this one, I have another Delphix node, but this one doesn't have anything in it. Just to log in here. Takes it just a second here. So on this one, I just have it as a cloud migration target. There's no object on this one. So what I want to do is simply replicate something from one to another. I've set up a replication job. Oh, no, actually I haven't, have I? Oh, no time like the present. '54, '89, 133, 138.
Excuse me, I'm coming
Yeah.
back to the Delphix storage. Is it on your data center storage or a cloud provider cloud storage, or is it on the client storage?
I'll answer that while he's setting this up. So it could be either. It depends on where a particular Delphix node is running. So if you deploy our software in your data center, you would connect whatever storage you have in your data center to that virtual machine. If you deploy a node in AWS, it's going to run on EBS block storage in the cloud.
Okay, so for critical company like bank, they can have your solution on-premise in their own storage. Okay.
They would run Delphix in a VMware virtual machine in their data center with whatever storage they have in their data center provisioned to them.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of our insights is that we are pre-storage agnostic. I don't really care what your underlying storage is, as long as you agree to live with what that storage parameter is.
In
It could be a thumb drive.
cloud, though, what about S3?
Yeah, so to be clear, it's any storage vendor, but it needs to be high-performance storage. So in AWS, we want EBS block
EBS.
storage provisioned to IOPS, actually. Right, because we're consolidating a lot of I/O. You might be running 30 database copies on top of a single Delphix node. All the I/O from all 30 of those databases flow through our file system. So it needs to have high-performance storage on the back end.
Yeah, I think the only pushback on that is that I don't necessarily, especially for something like test dev, I don't need high performance storage on the back end. I just need
You
the
do now?
Let me clarify, though. However, you're running 30 copies, let's say, of a 10 terabyte database. Without Delphix, that would take 300 terabytes of S3 storage, let's say. With Delphix, we'll have all 30 running in about 10 terabytes of high performance storage.
Of EBS. So which is
That's the virtualization that we're doing, right?
so which is cheaper, 300 terabytes of S3 or 10 terabytes of EBS?
Well, when you're on S3, you can't point your database engine to S3 and have it operate. You can with some of the big data technologies, but your RDMS database engine can't operate on S3.
No, but I'm doing cloud stuff, so I'm not doing RDMS. I'm doing other things. So that's
Depends on what you want to.
yeah. So I guess part of, because again, object storage is really, really useful, and there is a lot of development happening where object storage can be on site. There's people who sell S3 interface. There's loads of them. So I can have object storage as a different way of doing storage, which my applications can then make use of for a variety of things, particularly things like large data sets where I want to do analysis, machine learning, and so on, which some of your customers definitely do. So I'm looking, again, I'm going to what are the kinds of applications that I would be running to do, particularly dev test, because I want ephemeral workloads in cloud. So, okay, it's infrastructure, so that means it needs to be ephemeral stuff like dev test. Otherwise, I'm paying spot prices for permanent infrastructure, which is insane. But if my application is not doing EBS type storage, if I'm doing something like S3, I now have a constraint on the kinds of applications I can be doing development on in cloud. I'm just trying to figure out where are the edges of what I can do with this, so that this is appropriate for this stuff and not for these.
I think I struggle on two parts of it. There's nothing stopping me from, this is infrastructure as a service. I can do this in 2 private data centers. It's a IaaS VM-based solution. In a really large enterprise, this is a real pain in the butt. It is a true problem, which is how do I take my operations that I'm doing now? SAP is a great example. Other Oracle type applications. It's very hard to move test dev into the cloud. Not most solutions like this that I've seen in the past are not geared towards running specifically in the cloud. You guys are positioning it to the cloud, but I'm missing the cloudy hooks. And when you bring it down a notch to more greenfield type of solutions, you know what? How is this any different than taking a virtual a competitor? Dell EMC has RPAs that do similar stamp capability. Why can't I just take a virtual RPA, put it in the cloud, and do the same thing?
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of going there as well. I'm interested in things like the data masking. That's super, super cool.
Yes.
Being able to do data masking,
That's
particularly for these data sets, is really, really important. And being able to have role-based access control into things for developers, so that so they don't take everyone's health data and put it in an S3 bucket and let everyone download it. So that is really, really useful. But that's a software function. I'm getting the feeling that I need to put in a Delphix storage solution so that I can get access to the data masking thing that I actually want. I don't really want Delphix storage. I want that thing.
I would never expose an RPA to my developer.
Yeah.
But potentially I can expose this to my developer and them use it. And for these interesting reasons, what's the hook to get them to use Delphix? And I can never get them to use the features of the RPA.
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing here, though, is the operator interface. The consumer interface, or the one that's for the developer, is called SSI. And its whole goal is to be developer friendly, if you will. And let's see if we can switch over. Now, before I go there, though, let me just point out that this replication just completed. So now in my second one, I can see that I have nothing in my main namespace, but over here, I have the same stuff I had before, and I have all of the different snapshots as well as the time flow of this object, right? So in other words, I was able to replicate the entire tree of data, the tree of knowledge, if you will, around all those copies. There is another interface. See if I can get self-service to come up here.
And Woody, just maybe while you're doing that, I'll just add, it's very relevant to what we're doing here. The value that we're pushing for and that our customers are getting from us is definitely the data masking. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But it's not really about the storage. Like, that's the root of our company. We started there, and yeah, it's cool that you can get data. But you're right. There's lots of companies that provide that kind of thing at the at the file, or the block level, the storage level. One of the key things we do is we also couple that with a lot of orchestration. So it's not like we're just saying, well, here's your files, your file blocks that represent this Oracle database. Good luck to you. We're actually getting the Oracle database up and running and giving the end users the host and the port and the username and password. And we're doing all of that through self-service interfaces and APIs. So it's more that complete solution and that full orchestration of the data itself.
So very quickly, this is what a consumer would look at. And let's say that you're a developer. You might have your own specific environment set up. That environment might only have 2 objects in it. It might have the application and database that you care about. There are a variety of sources in this container, and I could have more than one. So you see I have the database and the application in this container, but I could have 20 if I want. My ability to do things to this works off of this TimeFlow right here. That's the view of the container. So that TimeFlow on that container, it could have dev today, it could have bug fix 7 tomorrow, it could have QA tomorrow. You can switch back and forth on that, and you can do that in 5 minutes, right? And you can do that whether you're on Azure or you're on Prem. You can move it from Prem to Azure. You can move from Azure to Amazon, doesn't matter. It means that as a developer, all those barriers that keep you from doing what you want to do, they disappear, right? The idea also is that you can treat it like Git. You have Git-like controls on your data set. And that's the data set is the container. So if I want to roll back my entire container to 5 minutes ago, there I go. I'm back in business. If I need to branch it, refresh it, if I want to go back to the parent source and I want to get the newest build, all those things are available to me very quickly, right? Going to the cloud, a lot of times there's the barrier to get there, right? That's the sort of, how can I get the transport done? And that's what you're talking about, right? Getting across that barrier is enormously painful. Crossing it again to go from one cloud provider to another, just as painful. When I'm sitting in the cloud, it's all about how can I optimize what I'm doing, which is, can I get this speed in the cloud? Can I get mass data here? Can I use that mass data to deploy what I'm going to try to do? Can I get that mass data again and again? The again part is the hard part. Having it integrated in here so that you can get it again and get it that fast, that's sort of the stuff that we do that sews it together.